organisms calculated a workaround in real time. This is why I organized the $10 million Evolution 2.0 prize.
The chain here that you guys are proposing is something like cognition codes and chemicals rather than chemicals to codes to cognition.
The next Einstein is the person who cracks the code on some fundamental theorem or discovery or what mechanism. The minute that happens, we are in a whole new kind of science.
The actual fact that we keep getting around, the most important thing is that all...
Alrighty guys, welcome to another episode of Perspective Shifts. I have two amazing individuals and scholars with us today. I will allow them to introduce themselves because they got a lot going on. We have an incredible discussion. There was a brand new paper that was released titled The Reasonable Ineffectiveness of Mathematics in Biology. And there's a lot of paradigm shifts that if you haven't heard about this yet, if you haven't read it, go do so. Just go pull it up side by side in the screen right now. It's going to be in the description. Both of these guys' links and contacts are going to be in the description down there as well. We have a lot that we're going to talk about. And if you're someone who's interested in biology, its relationship to faith, its relationship to how science is progressing, and really the state of the art and cutting edge thinking on this topic, then you're really going to enjoy this discussion for today. Perry, Sai, love you both. Thank you so much for joining me today. Let's start with you, Perry. Introduce yourself. Tell the people, who are you? Is the man that is Perry Marshall?
I wrote the book Evolution 2.0, which is right over my shoulder here, and organized a $10 million prize for the origin of the genetic code at the Royal Society. And I am also co-founder of the Cancer and Evolution Working Group. And I'm the president of a company called PredictRx, which is a cancer early detection company. And so that's my science career. And then I am also a well-known business consultant and business author. I wrote books on 80/20, Google advertising. So wear a lot of hats. And even though those two worlds seem like they're separate, I think they completely go together. Business is biology, biology is business. It's all ecosystems. It's all models. It's all predicting the future. It's all meeting the needs of, like, business is how 8 billion human beings feed themselves. So it's a pretty important thing in biology. And I'm proud to be a friend of Sai, who we wrote a fun paper together not too long ago.
Awesome. I love it. Sai, you've been on my channel multiple times. Glad to have you back. Sai, just go ahead and remind us who you are.
If I can remember, let's see. Oh yeah, I'm a biochemist, retired. Was in academia for about 30 odd years, published a lot of papers. And I became interested in theoretical biology a little bit later in the career. I'm now retired, but that's a relative term. Perry and I go back. I looked this up. I think we're about 10 or 11 years. We met at a BioLogos conference. And I think I was the only one who wasn't booing him, if I remember right. So we've been friends for a while, but I think this is our first actual formal collaborative effort. This paper, although we've talked about a lot of things over the years.
Yeah, that's right.
And you know, Perry's book was really important. It was one of the first books about the extended evolutionary synthesis. I also wrote some papers about it, but that book is still the standard. I have two books myself. The first one is called The Works of His Hands, A Scientist's Journey from Atheism to Faith, which is partly testimony and partly my views on science in general and how they relate to my faith. And the second one is called Science and Faith in Harmony, which I say Perry wrote endorsements for all three of my books. And that's more of a devotional type of short chapters about how science and faith are not conflicting but in harmony. And the big news is that my third book is coming out in August. That's called Beyond Evolution: How New Discoveries in the Science of Life Point to God. And one could take this paper we're going to discuss and place it next to that book, and there's a lot of overlap. I don't go into that kind of mathematical detail. It's a book. It's not a peer-reviewed paper. But I believe there's a connection there. Although our co-author, who I should definitely mention, is Stuart Kaufman, who is one of the founding leaders in the whole field of complexity theory, a brilliant guy. And thanks to Perry, who knows him. Perry knows everybody, by the way. And Perry knows him and brought him in, and he did a fantastic job on this paper. I mean, basically, both Perry and Stu equally contributed a huge amount. I guess I was the organizer and I came up with the title, but a few other things. But this paper is I just read it again now in preparation for this, and there's some great stuff in there. So and it's also very controversial, and I didn't think it was going to get such a quick reaction, but it's been featured on a few websites, and people have given their interpretations, and it's controversial, but that's how we wanted it. We were not out to publish something that everybody, oh yeah, that's good. They're supporting evolution, or they're supporting intelligent design, or they're supporting something. It's kind of new stuff, and it supports a lot of things, and some of them people haven't seen before. I think, at least I hadn't. So,
yeah. Talk about controversiality. I remember, I think, Sai, you posted online about how you guys met a lot of pushback in the process of publishing this. Like, you had to go back and revise a lot of things.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
The first reviews were not favorable.
Whoa. Okay. Hey, listen, before things start to get a lot more interesting and a lot more crazy, notice how the two scholars I have on, I'm able to keep up with what they're saying. If you want to be able to keep up with anything a scholar says and have the resources and frameworks to be able to do so time and time again, then click the link that's going to be in the description, as well as the comment section there. It's going to be in the pinned comment, and join the school community modules. And that's where you will be able to hop on instantly when you join a call with me, and we'll do a snapshot assessment of where your current learning is, and I will be able to create for you a systematized plan to get you to where you're trying to go. Don't go through the maze alone. It does not take years to get through this. It can just take an hour to get you some clarity. So if you want to be able to keep up with scholars like this, like those I've had on my channel and myself, go ahead. 7 days free. You can join, and you can get that done. I would love to hop on a call with you, and I will see you on the other side.
I can let Perry take it from there, because he did the lion's share of taking care of that, and I will never get over how impressed I was at that effort, Perry, which you know already, but that was incredible. We didn't have a lot of time, and he did a great job.
Well, the people who were reviewing it were physicists, and right. Physicists really, really, really like a mathematical universe. And I'm an electrical engineer, so I totally understand that. In fact, electrical engineering it's got to be the most precise field of engineering that it is. When you model a circuit on a computer before you build it, oftentimes the computer model could be 99.9% accurate as to predicting what it's actually going to do. So nobody can appreciate how lovable a mathematical model is than an engineer. And of course, electrical engineering is very rooted in physics, and I had lots of physics education. And so it's very easy when you come from that paradigm to think that everything in the world is equations. So hence the peer reviewers were predisposed to not like what we were saying, because what we were saying was that as soon as you cross into biology, you have literally left the world of equations. Well, the irony is nobody knows this better than the mathematicians, whose pristine world is even more pristine than engineering, because like math, like any good math paper is perfect. Like it's exactly right. There's no errors. 10 years later, somebody finds an error, then you're going to have to recorrect and republish because mathematics is an absolutely exact science. But so the story goes like this: in the 1920s, a guy named David Hilbert, very famous, revered, pillar of mathematics guy, he introduced a program and he had a big conference, and he said, we are going to close, in these next 10 or 20 years, we are going to close all of these open questions in mathematics, and we're going to finally nail this down, because there's these loose ends that nobody knows what to do with. And everybody's like, okay, let's march. And in 1931, Kurt Gödel published his incompleteness theorems. And what Gödel did was he took the conundrum, I am lying, or I am a liar, which if it's true, it's false, and if it's false, it's true. It's kind of a Mobius strip sort of a statement. And he decided to formally encode it in sophisticated mathematical logic and see where it took him. And what he realized was that all mathematical systems at some point hang in midair. All mathematical systems, so this could be literally anything of any sophistication, like Euclidean geometry, like high school, 10th grade, sophomore high school geometry. It depends on Euclid's 5 postulates, which are things like any 2 points, you can draw a line between them, and you can extend the line infinitely both directions, and things like that. Those are axioms, and you can't prove them. You can't prove that you can extend a line infinitely in both directions. You can't prove infinity. It has baked in assumptions that you just have to take on faith. And I use the word faith deliberately, because what I'm saying when I say faith is you cannot absolutely know this. You have to be willing to assume it and then just run with it. And so from even something simple like Euclidean geometry to the most complicated things in mathematics, all of them rest on axioms, and none of those systems can prove their own logic. They all make statements that are not provable inside the system, even though they are true. And so what Kurt Gödel did was he proved that you can never prove anything, and he proved it. I mean, it's really mind-bending that you could prove that you can't prove everything. And so then Alan Turing in 1936 was trying to figure out, can you figure out in advance if a computer is going to crash, or if a computer is going to find a solution to a problem? The answer is no. You have to run it. And that's called Turing's halting problem. And it turns out to be essentially identical to Gödel's incompleteness theorem, that you can't know what the system will do. You can't prove the system until you just run the system through its paces. Well, so what I did was I applied this to biology, and I realized that any time that you are making any prediction about the future, especially when you're an organism and you're a finite being and you're trying to guess what's going to happen on the outside world, that problem of trying to predict the future is identical to the halting problem. Now, I also know a few things, and Cy certainly knows even better than I do, because I've gone very deep in evolutionary biology, and I've discovered that organisms make predictions, and they make inferences, and they respond to an incalculable number of inputs with an even more incalculable set of outputs, and they consistently do better than luck in guessing what they need to do next. And so by any criteria that you could possibly come up with, organisms are making inferences, and they are not merely computing things. They are guessing. They are doing something that computers can't do, which is inductive reasoning. And so Cy and I, a couple of years ago, maybe a year or two, we had a little podcast interview where we stumbled into this discussion. And Cy, I'd already been thinking the thoughts that you just heard me say. And Cy says, well, there's this really great paper by Eugene Wigner called The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Mathematics and Physics, which is, it's a physicist gushing about how amazing math is. And of course, again, as an electrical engineer, yeah, I get it. Like, I think it's amazing that you can predict the avalanche current of a transistor junction and be like ridiculously accurate with a mathematical model. But again, as soon as we get into biology, all that goes out the window. And so now we bring Stu Kaufman in. Stu's been writing about this for about 4 or 5 years. And he's been saying Newton was the first revolution, Einstein was the second revolution, and the third revolution started with Kurt Gödel and Alan Turing, but the world hasn't quite accepted it. And the science community is still in denial about what the mathematicians already came to terms with many decades ago. And we can't really enter the next transition of science until we accept this. And Stu, who I admire because he swings for the fences and he does not care what anybody thinks. He is a rock star. He has made his mark in the world. He doesn't need anybody to like what he's doing. And the best thing about an emeritus professor is when instead of just retiring to the golf club, that they go out, they sally forth and they go, all right, let's fix this broken profession. So we wrote this paper together.
Not much to add for me.
That is great. I couldn't have asked for a better opening there. I love it. And Perry, it's your fault for how much money I've spent on buying so many of these books to educate myself to at least somewhere where I can be here, right? And thank you for that. I bought this like 400 or 500 page book. I think it was on developmental plasticity. I just went to the EES side and I was like, I'm gonna go buy everything, and everything. So it's been great. And we're gonna go through a lot of that stuff. And I think what's really good to start out here to do is just like, what is the lay of the land of the paper here? Let's just kind of get the topology of it kind of out, and then we can kind of go into the specifics here. How would you guys put that?
Cy, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I might be able to answer that a little because I've just read it again. It's been a while. You know what it's like when you finally get a paper and you don't want to put it away and never think about it again for the rest of your life. Kind of like a book. But no, the paper contains a lot, and it would be impossible to cover each thing that the paper discusses. I just recommend people reading it, but we can summarize some of the key points, and I'm probably going to leave some out so Perry can jump in and fix that. He said a lot of the key points already, is that biology is not predictable, and that's clear. One of the things that we know, for example, is there's a lot, we can't even define things in biology very well. Mm-hmm. Fitness, how do you define fitness? Well, fitness is defined as being able to survive better. And how do you measure fitness? You measure which individuals survive better. So that's called a tautology, which means it's true, but it doesn't tell you anything. What's a species? How do you tell what's a species? Where does one species end? Well, some species only mate with each other. Other species can mate a little bit with other species, a little bit maybe. There's no clear definition of what a species is. What's a gene? Well, a gene is, a section of DNA, And then what's an allele? Well, allele is a variation of a gene. It has a slightly different sequence from the average in a population. Well, how many DNA sequence changes have to happen before an allele becomes a new gene? No answer. Not predictable.
No.
It could be one, it could be 1,000, it could be 1,000,000. So there's so many basic concepts in biology that are just impossible. Again, as Perry was saying, they're not computable. I guess one major theme of the paper is biology is not computable. The great physicist mathematician, oh boy, the name just went out of my head, used Gödel's theorem to show that consciousness is not computable, which is very interesting because you know who I'm talking about? Oh my goodness, this is
Penrose?
Yeah, thank you.
Nice.
Roger Penrose said, and Roger Penrose is, he's not talking from any sense of theism or some kind of, and by the way, Stu is also not a theist. I mean, Perry and I are Christians, but there's, this is, you wouldn't know who's what by reading the paper and who wrote what.
Yeah.
We're talking about mainstream biology, and this gives me a chance to plug a book, which is not my own, by the way. It's called Evolution on Purpose.
Oh, yeah.
The very title is heresy.
Yeah.
Evolution on purpose? There's no purpose in biology. What are you talking about? You can't have evolution on purpose. The editors are quite a list. Peter Corning, Stu Kaufman again, Dennis Noble, James Shapiro, Richard Wainwright, and Addie Pross. So none of those people are Christians. They're all mainstream biologists. They're all pioneers. You might even say revolutionaries, people like Dennis Noble and Jim Shapiro.
Yep.
But this is mainstream biology, and it's happening all over. I mean, there are so many others. You could mention Michael Levin, and who we quote a lot in the paper. There's something going on in biology, and it's absolutely not related to any known laws of physics and chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's
what those laws are.
It's a matter of mathematical proof, and this is what I had to drive home with the peer reviewers.
Right.
And they raised a lot of questions that in the first draft we hadn't really covered very well. But I said, I had to emphasize, I said, listen, Gödel's incompleteness theorem is a mathematical proof. Turing's halting problem that says that you can't know if the computer program is going to reach an answer until it reaches an answer, and you can't predict it in advance. That is a truth. It is undisputable. And so biology is doing something where the next step is not computable from the previous step.
Right.
And a lot of people who are kind of very emotional attached to the precision of mathematics are going to get very nervous and upset about this. But I want to point something out that's not very obvious, that's really profound about biology. If we could agree, I think a lot of people might agree that the weather, at least in principle, is computable, in that, what happens 10 minutes from now and 30 minutes from now is just a computational result of whatever the wind currents and the temperatures were. I think most people would go along with that. We still know from chaos theory that it's hopeless to predict it 6 months in advance, because you can't measure every little molecule in a butterfly wing could cause the next hurricane. And we've known that for 50 years. And so people are good with that. So even in a allegedly perfectly computable universe, you still can't predict the weather more than a month or two at best. Let's go to biology, though. there's 20 billion water molecules in a bacterium. I don't know how anybody would hope to model all of that in any computer that we could fit in our solar system anytime in the next million years. You could never compute all that. But if I drop a sandwich in the park, I know that the ants will come running. Biology is predictable in a way that the weather is not. Why? Because it's teleological. Hunger is teleological. I'm hungry. I want a sandwich, and ants respond to sandwiches the same way humans do. And so biology predicts the future. Biology makes the future manageable in a way that the dead physical world does not and cannot. And so what we said in our paper was, there are heuristics. What's a heuristic? A heuristic is an inexact formula or equation or rule of thumb that it's never exactly right, but it's usually approximately right. And it's calculable with a very small amount of information. I bet you if we went and got an ant expert and we said, so do you have any like little back of the envelope equations about how fast ants come running or something like that? He'd say, oh yeah, there's a paper in 1936 that, you know, it had a little quadrant thing or something on it. And yeah, you know, the time constant of ants coming for sandwiches is, you know, a minute and a half. And it would be accurate in Africa, and it would be in South America, and it would work in Europe, and it would work in your backyard. And so what we ended up saying in our paper is that this notion that you can ever have enough information to predict and analyze everything is a complete fantasy. Mm-hmm. And you usually don't need more data. You need more wisdom and better perspective on the data, and you need more judgment about which data to pay attention to and which data to not pay attention to. So Dennis Noble has a really great version of this. He said, if I'm a doctor and you come into my office and I measure your height, your weight, your girth, your blood pressure, and your pulse, I can predict more about your mortality from those 5 little pieces of information than from sequencing your entire genome. And guess what? The Human Genome Project did not deliver 25% of what it's promised, and we're now 25 years later, and it still hasn't cured all the diseases. I just saw a headline where a guy said, AI is going to cure every disease in 10 years. That guy has no idea what he's talking about. He's never studied biology. Right. Oh my word. Yeah,
the Human Genome Project is a really interesting case study. You know, nobody that I know of, Perry may have been an exception, but I don't think I knew him then. Nobody I know of was dubious about the Human Genome Project when it first, you know, was coming up. And then nothing happened. I mean, and why? Because it turned out knowing the sequence, as hard as that was and what a great accomplishment it was, that was like 2% of the issue. What really counts is how are these genes regulated? How do they interact with each other? What turns them on and turns them off? And that is so complicated. The whole field of gene regulation, I wrote one paper on that and then gave it up. I mean, it's impossible. It's hard.
You know what the most complicated part about the gene regulation is?
What?
Pretty girl walks by and the genes start regulating differently just because of that. Now, how are you going to write
exactly?
How are you going to write an equation for that?
Yeah, because everything affects gene regulation. Hormones, as per your example, and fear of the unknown, which is something that we don't even understand, and all kinds of things. So, the genes they're not the masters. They're basically servants, just like the cells are. In fact, the cells are less servants because the cells do a lot on their own.
Mm-hmm.
But the actual fact that we keep getting around, the most important thing is that all of biology, including single cell organisms, are cognitive and they have agency. Based, and this is expanding what Perry said, based on their communicative abilities, because all living cells communicate with each other, based on their sensory ability to know what the temperature is, to know what the chemicals are around them, to know what's going on in the environment. Based on all of this, they think, remember, and as Perry was saying, predict. And think, oh, well, the temperature just dropped. Last time that happened, the sucrose level went down. I should change my metabolic profile to look for something else to eat. And they do that every time it happens. They do that faster. This is single cell bacteria do this. Now, of course, they're not thinking in words and they're not seeing or smelling. They're using signal transduction, which is a chemical way of, but every living organism does this. Nothing that's not alive does it. Nothing. There's nothing outside of biology that has cognition or agency or purpose, and everything in biology does. So, I mean, that's all you have to say, basically. My book is all about that, but written in terms for lay people, not like it's paper, which is much deeper.
Yeah, guys, fantastic thoughts. I have some questions here that are going to really just open this up even more. And the first one I have for you guys is you contrast the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics and physics with its reasonable ineffectiveness in biology. I think we've talked a little bit about this, but could we elaborate a little bit on the fundamental difference you see between the physical sciences and the biological sciences that accounts for this disparity? And is it solely due to something like complexity, or is there something qualitatively different about living systems?
I think what I just said is qualitatively different. It has to do with the things that life does that nothing else does. One of the things life does, by the way, that nothing else does is replicate itself. And that's really important.
Yeah, you've actually talked a bit about that.
Yeah, it's self-replication is what allows evolution to occur. Evolution is trivial. It's just an automatic response to self-replication with errors. Okay, so you get evolution. As I said, there's nothing profound about evolution. It's just the way that things happen. And it's based on a principle of life, which is self-replication with high accuracy that nothing else does. And we don't know how that started, by the way. That's another subject.
Yeah. Well, if you were to ask 100 biologists to define life, right, you would get 100 different answers.
110.
But let's say that you compile those answers. In fact, Mike Levin did this informally. He hasn't published this yet, but I was on an email thread with literally 100 scientists, and he asked everybody, okay, so everybody define, and so it went on. It was 100 emails long, and so when you compile all the answers you get, most of the stuff you get is stuff that non-life doesn't do. So very early in my Evolution 2.0 project, I figured out there are no even humans don't even know how to make self-replicators. There's not even self-replication in human technology. So, okay, that's a really interesting data point. Okay, and then you have this thing, we all recognize it when we see it, but we take it for granted. And it's the resilience and the willful power of life to self-determine. So one of the examples we give in the paper comes from Michael Levin, where he had frog embryos developing, and he put barium in the water. Well, barium is a potassium blocker, and it causes the ion channels that generate the electric fields that are necessary to guide development to be blocked. So their heads exploded. Then nobody knew this was going to happen. Then the heads grew back with barium resistant chemistry and went on to develop. And Mike's like, hey, wait a minute. Nobody has any reason to believe that there's like a barium clause in the DNA, like that there was ever in a billion years of history. We don't have any reason to believe that there was like this great barium incident, and that that this got baked in to the physiology. The only reasonable conclusion is that these organisms calculated a workaround in real time, and they said, well, okay, barium is a potassium channel blocker. What do we do? And they did some biochemical thing. You can go look it up and find out what it was, and they worked around it. And this is what Stu Kaufman calls an affordance. Yes. And any clever engineer does this all the time. It's like, I don't know, what could I use this water bottle for besides drinking water? Well, I could use it to sweep all the books off my bookshelf, or I use it to hammer a nail, or I could bonk my dog on the head, or like there's an unlimited number of things that you could do with any given object. And one of the amazing things about biology is it looks at what it's got and it says, how do I use this? Like, I think another example of this that I think is really profound is the placenta, which, as far as anybody can tell, the proteins in the placenta were repurposed from an endogenous retrovirus that had gotten injected in. So it started out as a parasite or as an invader that was not wanted, and then it got, DNA got jacked up and it got inserted in there. And then some cells and tissues said, what could we do with this? Well, that protein appears to be very useful in a placenta. And so that's what we happen. And this is the part about biology. This is the part about evolution that's so remarkable. Now, like Cy said, well, evolution is just what you get when you get replication. I a little bit disagree with that. I think the interesting parts of evolution are these immediate changes that organisms improvise, like jazz improvisation, like while they're playing. And then not only do they solve the problem, they then inject it into the heredity so that the next generation inherits it. And see, this is the part of the evolution story that people like Richard and Dawkins and Jerry Coyne never, ever, ever tell you about. So that book, Evolution on Purpose, it's so deep, it's so profound, and it goes so far beyond what anybody ever read at Barnes and Noble bookstore about evolution.
Yep, there it is.
This is the untold story of the 20th century. Never mind the 21st century.
Well, I don't disagree with that at all, Perry. What I was saying was I was referring to the standard neo-Darwinian, very simple, natural selection does everything, which in fact we know it doesn't, and you just said why. So evolution as a whole is obviously much more complicated, and there are so many examples. I mean, the whole people wonder where the eye came from. Well, the eye came from jellyfish they needed to know where was up, so that they could get closer to the surface, and they developed a light sensor. That light sensor eventually became an eye. I mean, that's it's like the placental story, which by the way, the placenta is a fascinating story because it's one of those things where Barbara McClintock turned out, as usual, to be right way ahead of her time, and that's someone that Perry has talked about a lot. And she talked about transposons before we knew what they were. And that does so much. That has so many influences on how life works. It's a book by itself, which we're not going to get into. But I think that I have one line of 3 words in my book that hasn't come out yet, but which just sums it all up. Life is different. Life is different. Yes, it is a science, okay, but not all sciences are the same. And life is different from everything that isn't alive in so many ways. And we've given a very brief overview of some of those ways. And we haven't gotten to the bottom of it yet. I mean, that story of the barium, and there's another story of the tubule dimension, the lumen size of the tubules. It's also in the paper. I mean, and Michael Levin has a chapter in the book that we keep talking about, the evolution on purpose, where, he talks about how it seems as if cells have a goal and they'll do whatever they can to reach that goal. And I got to tell you, I haven't looked into this deeply, but my wife just brought me a few days ago to an exhibit in the National Botanic Gardens on orchids. I don't know much about flowers, flowers, okay. But I couldn't believe what I was seeing. These orchids, every orchid species is 100,000 million% different from every other one. They have different colors, different shapes, different morphologies. They have all kinds of things attached. I didn't know this about orchids. How did that happen? These are the same order. And their DNA can't be that different from each other. So there's something going on here, which I don't know. I maybe orchid people do genetically. That is one thing they have in common is they're all what they call deceivers. They all pretend to be something else. So what's going on in the orchid's mind, quote unquote, is how can I fool? How can I fool the other plants? How can I fool the pollinators? And they find ways to do it. They have a goal in mind, quote unquote. Now, all this sounds stupid. This sounds like I know nothing about biology, because who would say this? But that's where we have to go. We have to go where it's scary, where people don't want to go before. And Perry's been saying this for years, and I always said, yeah, sure, Perry, that's just Perry. It turns out he's right. We have to be willing to go. When we're looking at life, we have to be able to look at really radical new ideas.
Yeah. Sai, you can say that it sounds stupid to say that an orchid is purposeful, but any 6-year-old would agree that it's purposeful.
Yeah, that's right.
And furthermore, all of the really reductionistic atheist books that describes the orchid, they'll start by telling you that it's purposeless, and then they'll use this natural selection description that is dripping with teleological implications. And then at the end of the section, they'll say, and of course, this is not purposeful. It's like, when are people going to get tired of being gaslighted?
Yeah.
And having their common sense hijacked by people who browbeat and intimidate them into no longer seeing what ought to be bloody obvious.
Right.
Ask any farmer, ask any botanist, ask any lady at a flower shop. She'll tell you orchids are purposeful. So really, a lot of people, they get educated into becoming derelicts.
I mean,
that's fine to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. The point is that there is dogma in biology.
Yeah.
And of course, there's dogma in physics, there's dogma in everything. But the dogma in biology is so outdated. And this is what Perry was just talking about. Here's the dogma. There is no purpose in science. A volcano doesn't have a reason for blowing up. It's physical forces. Well, biology is a science. There cannot be any purpose in biology. That is ancient dogma that has to go away.
So, and let me drive that point home. So I have now been in the cancer business for 5 years, which started when we organized the Cancer and Evolution Symposium. And you will never, ever, ever solve cancer as long as you're telling yourself that cancer cells are purposeless and stupid.
Right.
Cancer cells are
They
smarter.
clearly are not.
I name an oncologist that's smarter than a tumor. Name one. Especially a stage 4. Name one oncologist that is smarter than glioblastoma. Name one oncologist that is smarter than stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Tell me their names.
I'll tell you what the problem is here, Perry. And we haven't discussed this before, but I used to be in cancer research. And the problem is they know this. You will hear oncologists say a stage 4 tumor cell has almost unlimited potential to do whatever it needs to do. And sometimes it is, in fact, almost supernatural what these cells can do. But they won't take the next step and say they have a purpose. And the reason they don't do that is because if they admit that a cancer cell is acting according to a purpose, and boy, do they do it, why aren't normal cells doing that too? And the answer is they do. Normal cells have purposes too. One of their purposes is to, not kill the host, so they don't do what cancer cells do. But they have purposes too, and that cannot be admitted. We have to change that. That has to stop. We have to get rid of this dogma and say evolution on purpose. Yes, life depends on purpose.
I really like what you guys are saying here, and I think that this is some of the most progress I've seen, where the intelligent design people, and listen, that's an umbrella. There's a lot of different people. Some people could even include you guys in there as well, where their voices are being heard. And then, the evolutionary biology people are like, no, don't bring in their non-science into this place. Now they're feeling heard because it's not a theory opposite or rival to evolution, but it's a rounding off, it's a completion, it's a perfection. Yeah. We're learning more. So we're in this middle space, and that's what I love. And so when I'm talking to my ID friends, I'm like, listen, I always recommend that book. Read Evolution on Purpose. You don't have to toe this weird line anymore where you can have both.
That's right.
That's absolutely true. In fact, it became very clear to me as I went down my Evolution 2.0 journey that there was a on the right, you had a creationist narrative it's all a miracle, and on the left you had this materialistic narrative and none of it's a miracle. And the scientific latitude in either of those extremes is very narrow.
Zero.
But when you go in that middle route, it's like an infinite rabbit hole that goes down in the middle. And so like in my journey, I stopped trying to make God some endpoint a long time ago. For all I know, there could be an infinite number of layers. I don't operate like, God is just right around the corner at that next discovery that that's not really helpful. Like, God is bigger than that.
Right.
God is big enough for a universe itself to be infinitely deep, and God is bigger than the infinitely deep universe. So now this is almost like, how many points are there between pi and the number 4? Like, well, I think there's an infinite number of points, and it doesn't take anything away from the whole entire number line. There's small infinities and there's big infinities. And so I think the whole profession, this whole debate, in fact, using the more recent political polarization as an example of what had been going on for a long time, that many times media people thrive on a debate of just making the ping pong ball go back and forth.
Yes.
And they profit and they thrive on never getting to a solution.
Right.
Just tying it all up and like just keeping it going. Whereas, no, stop this silly arguing. And let's go down, let's go another level down the rabbit hole, because I think there's an infinite number of discoveries. And I think there are I think There are cures for cancer in this. There's cures for viruses. There's solutions to longevity in this. I think there are very rich analogies and metaphors from ecosystems that we can apply to our institutions, our businesses, our politics, and everything. I mean, you can't imagine what we're missing by taking the bait with these simplistic narratives.
Right.
Yeah, I love that so much. And Perry, I remember when you were on Unbelievable all those years ago, you had that quick little discussion with Stephen Meyer, and I remember you saying, "Hey, we do not know how deep nature's toolbox goes." And I remember and listen, no shade on Stephen Meyer or nothing, but this is what he said. He said a response akin to, well, that he just wrote it off and said, that's just nature animism is what it sounds like. And so this entire cognition stuff that you guys have had so many nuanced points talked about, published, written, was just written off as that's just nature animism. And I'm like, man, like, no, like this is there is so much dogma, like you said, even on the side of some of the ID things, because the equating of evolution as just the modern synthesis, just the neo-Darwinism, just atheistic materialism is getting in the way of a lot of other people who would otherwise be on your side to see that this cognition is not an enemy here. And so I love what you're saying, Perry, of like, listen, I've stopped trying to draw the line wherever that's at. I've stopped trying to say, oh, it's here, and oh, it's here every time. We just kind of move the goalpost, right? God's right here now. Oh, he was there before, but now he's right here. It's kind of like the supernatural, natural distinction. It's like that just keeps expanding.
Right.
And so it's like, why even use those terms in the first place? I see that happening. One thing I wanted to ask here, we can kind of leave off on this, is you guys, say something akin to, the chain here that you guys are proposing is something like cognition codes and chemicals rather than chemicals to codes to cognitions. What would you say to anyone that would like be skeptical of that initially? How would you get them on board?
I have a $10 million prize if you can prove that it's chemicals create codes, create cognition. There is no example in the literature that either of those steps actually works. Right. This is why I organized the $10 million Evolution 2.0 prize, because what the prize is asking for is, how do you get coded information without cheating? Like, every computer in the world and every human designed thing has code, and all the human languages have code. How do you start with no code and get code? And nobody's answered that. And so I got $10 million if anybody's got like otherwise. So my paper, Biology Transcends the Limits of Computation, it says all of the examples that we actually understand are cognition first, which creates code, which then controls chemicals. And this is the empirical pattern in biology, and the opposite narrative, which everybody talks about. It's never been observed. And so we got $10 million for the first step, and we get submissions all the time, and most of them are really lame. So there is something very, very deep in the universe that we haven't even begun. Mm-hmm. And I think the current conversation that you're hearing now, especially in YouTube and podcasts and stuff about consciousness, cognition, and agency and the new biology, mm-hmm. all of those conversations are headed in the right direction. And I think the next Einstein is the person who cracks the code on some fundamental theorem or discovery or what mechanism that drives that. And the minute that happens, we are in a whole new kind of science.
That's right.
That's amazing, guys. Sorry, you have one thing you want to say?
Oh, I just want to say that when I read Perry's paper with the I call it the triple C thing, consciousness leads to code, leads to cognition, or maybe I got it backwards, but whatever. But consciousness came first, and cognition, and then codes, rather than the other way around. I said, I know Perry very well, but now I got to get him involved in this. And we met, what was it, last summer, right? At the ASA meeting, and we had a nice discussion.
Yeah.
And we decided to write this paper. At that, we were sitting at a table somewhere in the hallway, and we blocked it out, and that was the beginning of the paper. So I think that I'm really struck by that particular insight that Perry's had. I think it's one of the most important insights that I've seen ever. So I'm glad you asked the question, Tim, because that is something that people really should think about. And luckily, we also have it in the paper. So if you don't go back to Perry's original paper, it's reprinted in this recent one. So take a look at that.
Guys, thank you so much for joining me today. Everyone, all of their work will be in the description, so please go take a look at it. You guys have benefited me in so many different ways in my journey. I am in your guys' camp forever. This is where we're at. So if you guys want to learn more about that, relevant links will be in the description. Perry, Sai, thank you so much. See you on the next one.
Thank you.
Take care.
Like that, you have reached the end of the video. Get yourself a pat on the back. You are awesome. You are dedicated to learning, and that's all this shows. So if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and do that. And if you know anyone who has not subscribed yet and would so benefit from this, go ahead, be an altruistic person, be full of agape love, send this to them so that they can benefit. There'll be much more of like these coming out soon, so turn those notifications on, and I will see you then. Thank you for your support.